Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War Frontline update for the 7th of May 2024. Before we dip into the frontline, please check out the key on the screen at the moment. Pause the video if you don't know what the lines on the map mean. JR has done a fabulous job again concerning the lines, actually doing the mapping. We are toying with an idea of adding a grey zone in there somehow. It may just be a set amount of grey zone to give you an indicative idea rather than grey zones drawn from anywhere, or it might be a grey zone actually drawn from one of the mappers. The problem is there are lots of lines on this map, right? So we've got the white line is the line from the 30th of May before the counter-offensive. I guess I could turn that off now, but I find that quite useful as giving us an understanding of a kind of benchmark of where we were at a given point in time. So I quite like having that there. Then we've got the three different mappers. The blue is Andrew Perpetua. I see him as a neutral mapper. He's pro-Ukrainian, like morally and politically, but he's not bothered about whether it's for or against any particular side in how he maps. We've got Deep State Map, who will have a pro-Ukrainian agenda, being affiliated with sort of with the armed forces to a degree. And then we have Syriac Maps, a pro-Russian mapper, and as a result we have three very different interpretations of the data, and that gives us a good sense of what's going on. But then if you're going to, these are the Russian defensive lines, remember, so in front of these lines, if you think to the south at the moment, there will be a grey zone where neither side is in control of the area. One might argue that what Syriac Maps has here is in fact actually a grey zone. And it could be that the Russians attacked here, got repelled, and then retreated, but this is not under Russian control. Or it could be that they are under controlling this area, and the other two mappers have got it wrong. In which case, the grey zone will be somewhat further to the south, where there'll be a bit of a no man's land, and the Ukrainian trenches might be around here, and that's where they are robustly in control. So sometimes there are changes to the mapping that will not suggest, that will not show on a daily basis on my mapping, because there might be an increase of Russian or increase of the grey zone. So it could be, for example, if the Russians did an attack, let's get somewhere where they're broadly in agreement. So if the Russians did an attack just here from Kislivka, and at the moment it could be that the Ukrainian lines are here, and that it pushes the grey zone back. So maybe the Ukrainians retreated a little bit because they're under heavy bombardment from aviation, and actually the defensive line for the Ukrainians that was then pushed back to here. If the Russians weren't actually occupying that area, if they were still sort of operating out of here, you would not see a change to my mapping, even though the Ukrainians had effectively retreated somewhat. So this is only the Russian defensive lines. You get that, but we might be playing around with with the grey zone demarcation on the map. We'll have a chat. As you can see, somewhat quieter day than we have seen. Just three areas of confirmed changes. I say confirmed changes are big actual claims from the mappers here. We're going to go to this northern area by although there are two elements of this down further south of Krokmelna, on the way sort of in the Stelomakivka direction, and then we have Kotelyrivka and Kislivka area, where Andrew Perpetua agrees now that the Russians have made those gains inside the village of Kislivka. So the agreement there, I don't think that actually means that there was any gains in this area by the Russians over the last 24 hours, just a mapping agreement. If we come down here, we can see that Andrew Perpetua claiming that the Russians have indeed made some gains just east of Berestova. We go to the Institute for the Study of War. There are a few claims to go through concerning the northeastern area, Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea. We start with geolocated footage published on May the 5th and 6th, shows that Russian forces marginally advanced east of Stelmakivka and south of Krokmalna, both northwest of Svatova, respectively. And a Russian mail blogger reported the Russian forces advanced 300 meters on the eastern outskirts of Stelmakivka. So this is coming down from here. So he talks about south of Krokmalna, which could be this advance, and then east of Stelmakivka. So we'll have a look at what that claim was. And we have Ukrainian paratroopers destroy the enemy in a Kupiansk direction. So lots of fighting going on here. And this is the lead vehicle explodes. The following vehicle might have also taken hit just milliseconds later, but not really clear. And then there's an unknown wreck. So we're gonna just take this particular geolocation. Now this suggests that Russians are in this area, but it doesn't suggest control of that area necessarily. It could mean that they control this area, but often they get vehicles blown up and then they retreat because they've had a repelled attack. I don't know what the situation is here. There is a repelled attack that has taken place there. Andrew Perpetua has that on the edge of where his lines are. Surat Maps is much further to the west there. So I don't know, make of that what you will, but the Ukrainians are giving the Russians a little bit of a hard time, as that is Russian equipment and troops being destroyed in that general area just around Krokmalna. Then it says, I don't think anything else that we need to read into that, just talk about Kislivka and what have you. We come on then down to Chaziv Yar, actually, so no change on the way down past the Terny Torska salient, past Kremina and the Seversk front line, and we come to Chaziv Yar. No changes to the mapping there, which is good news for the Ukrainians for sure. And we'll pop and see one of the sources now. We're going to pop into Radu Hosu, that he's the Romanian analyst, political analyst that does a bit of, he's done an awful lot of fundraising for the war effort. He's been in Ukraine a number of times. He was responsible for making that armoured hospital bus and other vehicles that then got bombed, got struck by the Ukrainians. I would argue that was a war crime. Anyway, Radu Hosu says, I'll write today about the most important battle of the year, the Battle of Chaziv Yar, and I will reiterate its importance after the news there. So news. The Ukrainians attacked Russian positions south of Ivanivska, see on the map, marked with the yellow arrows, exploiting a vulnerability in the Russian assault pinnacle, and thus advancing about 500 meters, putting the Russians' very operational plan in trouble. Okay, so we look at the map. He's, very simple map there. Actually, if you go and look at reporting from Ukraine's videos over the last couple of days, they have he has talked about this, where the Ukrainians have counterattacked in this area to the south, and this is arguably causing the Russians a bit of a rethink here, because they're having to potentially redirect troops to deal with the counterattack down here, which might be why the Russians haven't made large advances in the Chaziv Yar area for a few days. The last week has been somewhat slower. There was this attack here up towards the canal that Andrew Perpetua doesn't quite agree that they can control all of that land, the Russians, in the nature reserve and forestry area there. But there was two successive days where I think reporting from Ukraine talked about this area. So that's what Radu Hosu is mentioning there. He goes on to say, adding to this, the 3 bridges over the blue marked channel east of Chaziv Yar have been detonated, and we saw one of those destroyed the other day, which will buy valuable time for the AFU defences. So he's talking, I showed you a bridge that had been blown up by the Russians, and it's not a bridge that we have linked on here. I'm going to bring up the bridges just so you can get a sense of where they are. They're not only bridges, there are culverts as well. And the culverts, I think, are more important than the bridges. So the culverts are like tunnels, if you like, and they allow vehicles to be driven over the canal, over a large area, and they're not something you'd easily destroy. So actually the culverts are more important than the bridges, because bridges can easily get destroyed, as they have been, and the culverts less so. So there was a bridge that was here, that the Ukrainians have made, and the Russians, I believe, blew that bridge up. Well, and that was helping to supply the Canal micro district. Well, it could be that Ukrainians, that's what Radu Hosu is hinting at, is the Ukrainians blew bridges up to slow down a Russian advance, and it would mean that they would have to negotiate their way across the canal in a more challenging fashion. Anyway, he continues. At the same time, the first deliveries of Western artillery and munitions have arrived in Ukraine, along with interceptor missiles for Patriot systems, which could generate a ban on Russian aircraft dropping dozens of carbon FAB-500 devastating bombs on Ukrainian defensive positions. All in all, this whole string of events is leading to an improvement in the situation on the ground, even if we're not talking about stabilization. Another piece of good news is that Chasiv Yar will not fall by May the 9th. And if the Ukrainian commanders' decisions are wise and the Russians make tactical mistakes, which I sense they're about to do, I'm hopeful that Chasiv Yar will hold out for a few weeks to a good few months, depending on what the Russians do to the Kupiansk and Pokrovsk axis. Well, I cannot see, the best will in the world, the Russians taking Chasiv Yar within a month, really. We did see some fairly quick work made of Avdiivka, didn't we, where they managed to take all of that really quite quickly. And I think that was a case of the Ukrainians really running out of ammunition, equipment, personnel, everything. I don't think that's going to be the case if they are getting their munitions and these key positions stocked up. I think Chasiv Yar will be, as you know, the other end of that spectrum, maybe a couple of months' time. It really depends obviously it depends on lots of variables there, but I think the Ukrainians could hold on to that. It depends what they want to do. It depends whether it is expensive for them, because it's going to come down. I think one of the important variables is the use of these these guided glide bombs that devastate the front lines big time, and the Ukrainians have not had much of an answer to them, but Patriot interceptors is an answer. And if the two Sukhoi fighters or fighter bombers that were downed, one up here in Kharkiv, in Belgorod Oblast supposedly, and one in Donetsk area somewhere, if they were taken down by Patriots, then actually that means that the Russians are going to be a little bit wary about using their air force close to the front line, as there have been around Chasiv Yar. There's been close air support, and it could be that if that is the case, that the Ukrainians could stall the Russians more. I mean, this is a place, remember, that the Russians are expected to take. The Ukrainians have pretty openly admitted, the second in command of the army has admitted that Chasiv Yar will fall. So it won't be any kind of surprise. It's just a case of when. So number two, the importance of Chasiv Yar. It's practically the last fortress with a geographical advantage, elevation and water canal to the east of the town, that can hold out even with heavy losses from the Ukrainians as well, and on whose resistance depends a strategic objective for Russia, the conquest of Donbass. Such a scenario whereby Donbass would fall as a result of the fall of Chasiv Yar, which would lead to the increase in Russian morale with a commensurately inverse effect on Ukrainian morale, could lead to the collapse of defences around Konstantinivka, and thus create a much easier path for the Russian concentrations to prepare the final assault on Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, the key cities for the conquest of Donbass. Okay, let's put that all into on the map, and let's understand what he's saying. So Chasiv Yar has the advantage of being on the high ground. So let's go to a bit of a 3D rendering of this. So it is, you can see there, that high ground, where are we going? So here you've got the high ground over Ivanivska. So if you remember, we've got Ivanivska here, and the Russians are moving to the west. They want to get on that high ground, and that allows them to have fire control possibly over Ivanivska, and then move along to the canal. The next problem the Russians have is the canal, but it is on high ground here. However, you know, it still goes up as we come into Chasiv Yar. You've also got forests around here. You've got some marshy areas, boggy areas. You've got water features. Although, you know, as we're coming into the summer, you know, how much will they come into play? There are lots of variables, but it is it has been, you know, fortified over time. This was a staging post for Bakhmut for the Ukrainians, and they've been there a long time. So you can imagine it's not going to be a walk in the park for the Russians. If we think about the height here, so we look at the bottom right hand corner of the screen, that gives you the height. You've got 243 meters, so about 240 meters. In the Canal Microdistrict, that's 225 meters, so it's going downhill. 209 meters. So yeah, it's all going downhill, so uphill towards Chasiv Yar, and it's not going to be easy for the Russians to take, but we know that they are willing to sacrifice huge amounts of equipment and personnel in taking places. I wonder how much equipment will be mechanized equipment could be used here given the canal. But remember, they took Bakhmut with virtually no mechanized equipment. This was one of the just meat assault places because Wagner really didn't command an awful lot of mechanized equipment compared to the conventional armed forces, and they were majorly responsible for Bakhmut. It was just meat assaults and meat assaults, partly possibly because of the problem of assaulting across the river, the Bakhmutivka River, and some of the topography around there, the physical geography. It could be similar here, whereby even if they had huge amounts of mechanized equipment here, they might not want to use it because there are only certain places they might be able to cross, and that means it's easy for them to be hit. So we'll see exactly how that plays out. Radio Hosu does continue. Further, such a scenario, I was going to say, it's really super key though, because it opens up this whole area for Konstantinivka, Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, this whole ring of cities, towns and cities there to be attacked. And of course, if the Russians want the Donbass, which they so desperately do, they absolutely need to take all of this land in order to take what is, here we are. So you've got Kharkiv Oblast over there, and this is Donetsk Oblast to the east of that border. So that blue line broadly is the border. Well, the Russians would have to take all of this area and all of Luhansk. Well, they haven't got much of Luhansk left to take, but Donetsk is a whole different kettle of fish. So you've got Pokrovsk and you've got all these other major towns around here. So I think it's a tall order for them to do that, but the first issue for them is taking the fortress that is Chasiv Yar, at least at the fortress at the moment. But of course, how much damage can that aviation do? So further, such a scenario could lead to a Russian demand for peace against a backdrop of a war-weary Western population and the internal political tensions for each European state. Due to the elections, I would not see it impossible that the West itself exerts pressure on Kiev to accept an unjust, unfair, morally disarming peace, which would further lead to social tumult within Ukraine that could be speculated upon by Russia. Thus, the battle for Chasiv Yar is an essential, almost crucial piece in a potential domino that certainly none of us wants. So that is how he sees that. The rest is about his sort of fundraising and whatnot, as a useful bit of analysis of Chasiv Yar there. Then when we come down, we can see that, and this is all potentially part of that Chasiv Yar attack, which is maybe forming this pincer movement where Konstantinivka is the initial major objective in that direction, and that would then take all of this Donetsk region here that includes New York, Toretsk, Sumy and whatnot, or either or, both and, potentially moving towards interdicting that road and towards Pokrovsk, which is the other major Donetsk objective in this particular area. So the Russians here, south of Ocheritina, just south of Solovyove, they have taken some more land. Deep State map says the enemy advanced near Novopokrovska, which is this small settlement. It seems to be their next objective, directly west of Bedichi over here. So, yep, they are moving in that northern area of this high ground behind the river, the Derna River here. They seem to have stalled a little bit around Semenivka and Orholivka and Umanska, but it all seems to be happening further to the north there. We'll pop into a couple of the sources. Syriac Maps says, situation north and west of Avdiivka, the Russian army made new advances towards Novopokrovska, and now troops are less than 1 kilometre from the first houses of that locality. And then I think we go on to Pervomaisky and Natalyove. So if we go back to the Institute for the Study of War, it doesn't say much about Chasiv Yar that we haven't already discussed. Geolocated footage published on May the 6th shows that Russian forces advanced along the E50 highway in eastern Netalyove. So as we come down here, this is the area. Now, we showed this yesterday. This is the highway they're talking about, the E50. We actually showed that the Russians have made some gains consistently actually along here. They've bitten off chunks every day. 100 meters, a couple of 100 meters each day. Here we have active hostilities on the southern flank of Avdiivka, attack of the Russian armed forces by several units of armored vehicles in Netalyove along the highway to Karlivka, hit armored vehicles of the armed forces of the Russian Federation at this particular point. So this is to say the Russians have been geolocated to this exact point. And yeah, that's much further back from where they have eventually been located since then. And then so nothing changing today, but that's just a little bit of a geolocation to suggest that, yeah, they are making those advances, would confirm that. And then Krasnohorivka, there's a little bit of talk about Krasnohorivka, I think. Yes, in the Institute for the Study of War. So a Ukrainian lieutenant colonel has reported that small individual Russian groups, likely around squad size, are trying to storm Krasnohorivka, but the heavy Ukrainian artillery fire, interesting, is preventing them from consolidating gains and conducting further attacks. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces have captured most of Paraskevivka, which is a settlement. Let's go and find that out. So that is to say that small squad groups are attacking inside Krasnohorivka. We have seen those turtle tanks and columns of vehicles going into Krasnohorivka. I don't know if that's still the case and whether they're now in the town, that those kind of vehicles are going to be suboptimal to use around here, and it's going to be going street to street by foot, but also using aviation to clear the path. That could be the case. And then Paraskevivka, which is on from Novomikhailivka, so it's further down. This is to say that the Russians are moving into Paraskevivka, as the ISW says. The Russians have claimed to have captured most of it, but ISW has not confirmed that. And then one Russian mill blogger is claiming that fighting is still ongoing on the eastern outskirts, or if it's the eastern outskirts, then one would, well, although that's another Russian source, I think the days for someone like Paraskevivka are numbered. The problem is Konstantinivka is next, and that is really a bit of a challenge for the Ukrainians, because that is your key, I think, to all of this area, and indeed to Vuhledar, because the Russians will come in from the north along this road, and I'm sure they'll just start mopping up the tree lines and trench lines in this area. So that's why Novomikhailivka has been so important. But like I said the other day, like Novomikhailivka was the graveyard of 312, 314. It was the last I heard, I think yesterday. So if you extrapolate that, and it's not necessarily justified to do that, but if you were to do that, say, right, this place took 314 mechanized equipment casualties, if you like, then there's another 314, there's another 200, there's another 200, there's another 200. Do you know what I mean? Like, if Russia is going to take the Donbass, then and Ukraine can attrit them at those same rates, they just don't have the ability. They do not have the resources to do that. So if you think Novomikhailivka is and I said this about Kharkiv, like the idea that you've got a small town here that is 4.5 kilometers by 4.5 by something like 1.6 kilometers. So 4.5 by 2 kilometers, right, at the most. And that took 314 Russian vehicles and goodness knows how many troops. Then, I mean, I said this about Kharkiv before, but let's just use, I don't know, Konstantinivka up here as an example, past Chasiv Yar, or even Chasiv Yar as an example. Like, goodness me, each of these places will exact such a huge cost on the Russians based on every other inch of this map that they have taken over the last, since the Ukrainian counteroffensive, taking back what they had lost and then going on and taking more. But it has come at a phenomenal cost. When we look at the losses in the Tonyenki Avdiivka area, they've lost, 1,100 vehicles in this area alone. Just wow. And those stats are now out of date. The Russians just cannot operate at those. They are such unsustainable losses, and yet there's no reason to think they won't lose similar numbers in further attacks. So we can worry that the Ukrainians are on their knees at the moment. But as I keep saying, and I'm not trying to be positive, it's just that the Russians can't keep operating at using that kind of calculus. They just can't. Interesting when we come to Velika Novoselka on the southern front line, and again, I'm not trying to be positive. I can't read it any other way. Staromyolsk. So the Russians had some great success in Uruzhany recently. They took all this area from north of the I always get it the wrong way around. The Mokry Yali River. So this meandering river. The Russians took basically all of that land over the last week. Well, actually, apparently the Ukrainians have counterattacked. So Getty here saying in Uruzhany, fighters of the Ukrainian 58th Brigade counterattacked in the southern part of the village, and they've taken 0.28 square kilometers. Liberated that at the southern end. That indicates control rather than grey zone. Having it in blue, at least it does to me. This is your grey zone there. Getty has the Russians not controlling much of Uruzhany, kind of like Andrew Perpetua, I think, more there. Possibly even less. But anyway, a counterattack taking place there with some sort of geolocations done. And then further to that, the Russians posted a video of shelling Ukrainian positions, which indicate that Ukrainian forces has made a more advanced liberation, which is actually 0.32 kilometers there. So although we haven't seen anything on the on any of our mappers, this has just come out this afternoon. So this is very recent. We might see these lines get pushed back a wee distance here as the Ukrainians are counterattacking. Interesting that they're counterattacking there, because we're not seeing too many examples of Ukrainian counterattacks at the moment because of troop numbers and equipment and whatnot. But they're happy to do it there, so that's interesting, or willing to do it there. What else do we have to say? So on the Robotina area, we have this claim by Surat Map situation. There is during the last 5 days, the Russian army has improved their positions at the center of Robotina. The Ukrainian army withdrew from the urban area to the adjacent trench systems located on the northern and eastern outskirts. It won't be possible for the Russians to end the battle for this locality until these defensive positions are taken. So that is claiming that the Russians are pushing on. The Ukrainians are left on the outskirts, but they are still defending. Not agreed upon by the other mappers. Not to say it's not true. I'm sure there is fighting going on there. Whether the Russians completely control that, I don't know. No doubt we'll see some mapping updates from the other mappers over the next day or so. And then we come on to, actually there is one more here, which is in that area. This is a geolocation. So we go back to the Institute for the Study of War. We have a geolocation published yesterday indicating Russian forces advanced in southern Robotina. Ukrainian and Russian sources stated that positional engagements continued there. So that's against what Surat Maps has said, but Surat Maps is more recent than this ISW claim. But we'll have a look at the geolocation. So that's active hostilities in the Orikhiv direction. That's the Robotina area. Attack of the armed forces of Russian Federation by a small motorized rifle unit in a central part of Robotina, clearing the position. The assault group takes up the position. Advance of the Russian armed forces up to 300 meters. So this is a claim that the Russians are advancing to this position, and that will put that in. See where that takes us in Robotina. Interesting. So that is indeed what Surat Maps is saying. So that Surat Maps would be in agreement with ISW or vice versa. As I say, I think the other mappers will catch up with that. It looks like that is actually the case. So Surat Maps could well be on point there. Right, we'll come to the Dnipro River, have a little look at Krinky now, and we'll go to the ISW first. There's quite a bit there to talk about this area, not just Krinky actually. So Russian forces recently made confirmed advances on the eastern bank, the left bank of Kherson Oblast. So remember, the river left and right banks are as the river flows. So it's counterintuitive here because north, south on this map has this being the right-hand side, obvs, and this being the left-hand side. But this is the left bank because the river flows in this direction. So you always talk about the river banks in terms of the flow of the river. This is your left bank, that's your right bank. And as I've said, and I've done a whole video on this, it's absolutely necessary you do that because certain areas, rivers will meander around. So the north bank here is one side of the river, but the north bank here is the other side of the river. So because it literally goes in every direction, you can't use your compass points to be able to tell you what bank you are on, or you can, but only in one particular place. It won't be relevant for the whole of the river. So you have to use left and right bank generally to do that. So the Russians have been pushing on the left bank, but not at Krinky. So that's an interesting claim. Geolocated footage published on May the 6th indicates that the Russian forces advanced north of Oleshki. So we're going to check this out then. We'll remind ourselves where Oleshki is, which is here. So you've got Kherson, you've got, if you remember, you've got the Antonivsky Bridge. Ukrainians were around here in the Dachi area. They took sort of control of here, but they haven't really pushed on past there because it's very difficult for them to do so because they have to come down this road. Is the only really route to get down here, and it's so obvious that you're traveling down that route that it'll just be like, you know, shooting ducks in a barrel. So it's very difficult to move on these river delta areas, especially with mechanized equipment. So they've kind of been stuck there, and this is how it's been, it appears, for some time. Now we've got this claim here. Artillerymen of the 11th Brigade and National Guard of Ukraine smoke the Katsap, so the Russians, out of our land. Location southeast of Nechayevo, Highway E97, near the bridge over the Konka River. So here we have a positioning for where the Russians have been hit by Ukrainian artillery. And yep, it didn't like that, did it? We'll try that one again. And there we go. Well, that's, I don't know see, this is where the ISW sometimes goes a bit wrong, or it goes a bit weird. The Russian forces advance north of Oleshki. Well, yeah, north of Oleshki is here, so maybe we'll get a different one from this. Okay, that's probably me being a little bit harsh to ISW because they were looking not at that particular geolocation, no doubt. So that's better. Right, okay, so interesting. The Russians are there. I don't know, again, that really indicates that they've advanced. Because when you look at all the mappers here, that is the Russians controlling that area, and they've controlled that for an awful long time. Having said that, I don't know that we've particularly seen them very active around there because, like I said, with the Ukrainians coming south, Russians going north here, and where there was geolocated footage of Russian vehicles being absolutely hammered going along this road when the Ukrainians initially came across the river, and you had Russians driving along this road and getting hammered by drones and artillery and whatnot. But it looks like the Russians are maybe pushing again, and that could be why the ISW said that they are, you know, pushing north of Oleshki there, making confirmed advances. I just would never define that as an advance because it's within the controlled zone of their territory. But hey, there you go. Positional engagements continued near Krinky. Ukrainian Southern Operational Command spokesperson stated that Russian forces are using up to 300 strike drones per day against Ukrainian positions throughout southern Ukraine. So, I mean, how big is southern Ukraine? Is that 300 drone strikes across this whole area? I just don't know whether that's a lot. I presume it's a lot because he's saying they're using 300. I just need to know how many the Ukrainians are using. The Russians are using that many. Is that a massive uptick? Without the context, it's difficult to know how meaningful that is. Platenchuk also stated that Russian forces are trying to gain control over Nistraya Island in the Dnipro River Delta and are suffering significant losses. A Russian source claimed that Nistraya Island is a contested grey zone and that high water levels are complicating any offensive operations to establish control over the islands in Dnipro River Delta. Obviously, with spring sort of just coming to an end, you'll get high waters around here before the summer sort of sets in. But this is the island that was. This island here, as far as I remember, which is the one that they, all the mappers agreed that Ukrainians had taken control over fully. But now the claim is that Russians are trying to take it back. But in so doing, it is costing them. They are incurring quite a few losses there. A Russian source has claimed it's a grey area, so that's in contention to what the Ukrainian General Staff had claimed, that they had taken that. So Russians claiming it's now a grey zone. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces are increasingly conducting guided glide bomb strikes against the right bank of the Dnipro. That is, I mean, it's not unusual. They've been doing that for an awful long time, all the way along here, particularly up in the Berislav area. That gets absolutely hammered by guided glide bombs. But all along this whole river, it's pretty horrific for the people trying to hang on tenuously to their life there. Anyway, that's enough from me. That's your full Frontline update. Hopefully that was of use to you. Please like, subscribe and share. Thanks so much for all your support. Really do appreciate it. Thanks for those who help out on Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal. That is insanely generous of you. And I'll try and give a personal shout out to some of those people over the next few days. I haven't done that for a long time. Anyway, thanks a lot. Take care. Speak soon.